tonight. It was 40 years ago this spring that the first space shuttle blasted off from Cape Canaveral. It marked the start of a new era, one in which, for the first time ever, a manned spacecraft would be reused.
The shuttle program lasted for 30 years, and its story is told in the new book, NASA Space Shuttle 40th Anniversary. News Center Maine has a special connection to one tragic episode in that history, as you'll hear in a moment. We talked about that and more with Roger Launius, the former NASA chief historian who wrote the essays in the book. And we started our conversation with a look back at the origins of the shuttle program.
The idea of a space shuttle goes back to Buck Rogers in the 1920s, where you've got a winged, reusable vehicle that makes it easy to go to and from and fly through space. And that was the objective. And the shuttle was sort of a fallback, but they never got the money that they needed even to turn it into a vehicle that was what was envisioned by NASA early on.
That's one of the interesting points in the book, is that NASA kind of did this whole program on the cheap, didn't it?
Yes, they did. The reality is that the NASA administrator in the early 70s believed he had a deal to build the space shuttle for what was then an astronomical figure, $5.5 billion. Then after he cut the deal, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, then slashed the price again. He was really upset about that.
Let me ask you about the impact of the shuttle Challenger disaster. Our TV station was actually broadcasting live that day with one of our reporters from Cape Canaveral, because Krista McAuliffe, the teacher in space, was from the state right next door, New Hampshire.
I don't think any teacher has ever been more ready to have 2 lessons in my life.
As the launch kept getting delayed, there were warning signs.
Pat, have we ever had a launch in that temperature range?
No, I am told that they have had some cold weather launches, but never have they launched one in any sub-freezing temperatures.
By this time, the broadcast networks no longer cut into programming to show NASA launches. But we carried the Challenger launch live, with Patsy Wiggins in the studio and me on the phone in the press grandstand, shivering from cold and anticipation.
Pat, there's obviously something wrong here. We're not sure.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
We stayed on the air for nearly 45 minutes before NBC took over.
The vehicle has exploded, and there's nothing that can be seen by the naked eye from here. It's many miles away.
The NASA officials have decided there will be no more shuttle missions until they find out what happened here today. A special commission has been appointed.
Obviously, a tragic ending that day to the launch of the Challenger. What was the lasting impact from that day?
Well, it was a horrific experience, obviously. We had a shuttle that blew up. We had 7 astronauts killed. It really threw into chaos a system at NASA that they believed was effective in terms of doing space flight. And it called into question as never before NASA, which sort of had this patina of excellence about it. And people believe that, whatever you want to do, give NASA the job and they'll go do it. Now that was proven incorrect, and it took a lot of time to recover from that.
You're a historian, so you look at the sweep of time and the sweep of human achievement. 150, 250, 350 years from now, when people are looking back at the Space Shuttle program and studying its impact, what are they going to conclude? What did we accomplish with the shuttle program?
Yeah, the shuttle was an appropriate next step beyond the moon program. No question about that. It is a process of making space flight routine. That was an intention of the program. But one of the things that has happened with the shuttle flying for 30 years, as it did between 1981 and 2011, was it turned low Earth orbit into the normal realm of human activity. There's nothing unusual or suspicious or threatening about low Earth orbit. I mean, it can be dangerous, just like any other place, but there's a very clear understanding of what you're going to experience there. The shuttle made that a reality.
And Pat Callaghan is with us now to talk about what it was like to cover the tragic launch of the Shuttle Challenger in January of 1986.
Pat, what stands out most in your memory when you think back to that day?
Well, first I'll point out that the gloves I was wearing were not winter gloves that we'd brought from Maine. We'd gone to Sears and bought some gardening gloves because that's all we could find, because we were not expecting it to be in the 30s in Florida, even in January. What comes to mind vividly, you showed one of my favorite moments, and that's when the astronauts arrived in their jets to get ready for the launch. And it's the only time you had any interaction with them at that point before the mission actually launched. And you got a nice sense of the dynamics of what was going on that flight, the way the crew interacted with one another, because they'd been training together for a long time. And it was really exciting. And the whole thing was a dream come true for me to be covering a NASA mission. So that's the happy memory. The other thing I recall is that you're familiar with all the smoke billowing after the orbiter exploded. And that smoke lingered for a long time. It took all day, it seemed to me, for it to dissipate. And eventually it just ended up looking like some light, thin clouds. And often I'll see a contrail like that in the sky to this day and still recall that, how it was there and it was gone.
Pat, Krista McAuliffe of New Hampshire was chosen to fly in the Challenger as the first teacher in space. For people who aren't familiar with what that part of the program was about, how did it come about?
Well, it was in fact because space flight had become too routine. As we pointed out, the broadcast networks weren't carrying the missions live anymore. And if you don't have public interest, as they learned in Apollo, they're going to cut your funding and end the program. As they say, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. So President Reagan and his team came up with the idea, well, we have to have civilians go up, and who better, they thought, let's make the first one a teacher. And we had a competition. All the states got invested. Everybody had 2 finalists in the program. And it was, while it may have been a stunt, if you will, to try to raise awareness and raise money, it actually was a useful program in that it was trying to get young people excited about science. And Gordon Corbett of Maine, who was one of Maine's finalists, who was there at the launch with us that day. Many of the teachers had gone home at that point after all the delays. He used those lessons for the rest of his life. He just passed away a few months ago, and he was a terrific teacher, and he was typical of the enthusiasm of all of the applicants in the Teacher in Space program.
Pat Callaghan, thanks again for joining us. We never get tired of hearing these stories, and you always have something new that I hadn't heard about before.
Thank you, Rob and Amanda.